All right, welcome everyone to our peer support supervisor affinity group. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, or I guess it could be early morning in some places where folks are. This session is going to be on trauma-informed supervision. I know this is something that the group had asked for, and I'm very excited that we have a speaker today who specializes in this. So just as a reminder, as we get started, if there are any kind of security issues that pop up, the session's going to immediately end, and we won't start again with the same login. You'll get a separate email that has instructions in it. And a quick disclaimer, you've heard this before, we are funded under a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And so everything that appears in this presentation, unless it's copyrighted, is in the public domain. And it also doesn't necessarily represent the official views of, or it's not an endorsement by SAMHSA, HHS, or the US government. Quick reminder of what the purpose of our group is. We are here as a peer network, an opportunity to network for those who support and supervise youth and or parent peer support providers. And you want to be able to really foster the growth and the support of this very unique workforce. So we focus on learning supervision strategies, improving agency practice, and really giving the opportunity to share resources peer-to-peer between other supervisors across the nation. Now, today's presentation has been approved for 1.5 CEUs through the University of Texas, Austin, for all of those that you see there on the screen. You will get a link, and I'm not sure if it will be at the end of the session or it goes out with the post survey. But either way, you'll get a link to fill out so that you can get your CEUs. Today's session will be 90 minutes. So that's why it's 1.5 CEUs. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce Danya March. She is our presenter today, and she comes to us from Oakland, California, and has been doing work for a number of years in the area of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed supervision. I've seen the materials she plans to share today, and you are in for something that is going to be so helpful in the work that you do with this workforce. Peer support providers come to us and come to this work with a wealth of experiences, including traumatic experiences. And as supervisors, we need to be prepared to support them, not as their therapists, but in a way that supports their ability to use their lived experience effectively in supporting others. So with that said, I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Danya to begin the presentation. As we go, feel free to interact in the chat. There are several of us from INTAC here that will be in the chat interacting with you. And I believe there's going to be time for question and answer as well. So Danya, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for that introduction. I'm excited to be with everybody today. Just a little bit about me. My name is Danya March. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am in Oakland, California. I am a white, queer, Jewish social worker and therapist. I've done a lot of work. The bulk of my work has been in community mental health. This is my office. I've been doing a lot of therapy recently, and COVID and Zoom has been my best friend during COVID. So still offering that, and have had some years working with young people who are supporting other young people, training peer advocates to work with folks who have similar lived experiences, and just doing a lot in mental health, community mental health, supporting adults also who are working with young people and in general. So trauma-informed care came big to me after a little while. Most of the communities that I've worked in experience chronic and complex trauma. And I was grateful when we started actually naming it and talking about it a little bit differently than we had in the past. And so that's been part of my work, is to support organizations and staff within organizations to see how we can approach our clients and our programs from a trauma-centered place, right? From a healing place. Even the emphasis sometimes on trauma can be traumatic, right? And thinking about how we center what healing is, and how we center what we know that healing is. And so that's been really a big part of where I've come from. So we're gonna look into that a little bit. We'll have some information. I'll give you some information, and really my hope today for everybody is that you'll be able to share with each other, but also unearth what you inherently know, and what you're inherently already doing to approach your supervisors and your supervisory relationships with grace and care, and with the lens of healing. So without further ado, I'm going to get myself and start sharing my screen with you. Let me see where that is. I'm also not on Zoom ton, so I'm just going to ask for grace around my process with this. So I think we should be good. Thumbs up if you can see this screen. Yeah, okay, awesome. I can't see all of you. I know there's a lot of you here, and I'm super excited to see some of you. So thank you so much for that. All right, so without further ado, the agenda today is we're going to land and come together. We're all so busy. I'm sure you're all so busy and working so hard. One of the most important things that we can do for ourselves, and also model for the people that we work with, is how we land. So we're going to land, we're going to convene. We'll go over a few of the trauma-informed principles just to kind of get a sense. We're not going to go into everything today. There's just not enough time. And I really want to make sure that all of you have time with each other, because like I said, you all have the experience, whether it's lived or, lived through work. And that's really important for us to be in connection with each other. So we'll talk a little bit about trauma-informed supervision, talk a little bit about boundaries, right? One of the big things is, how do I not be somebody's therapist, even though I might be called, because there's so much going on for this person that I'm supervising, right? Or there's so much going on for me because I am the person who is the peer advocate. So just thinking about that, we'll have a chance to connect. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, and then we'll close. You're going to see slides. I may skip them in interest of time. I really want to make sure that you all have time together, and that we have time to answer questions and just to be in community. So that's what we're going to do. Oh, what I want to ask you before we even go into anything else is, I want to ask you to look around your space and locate a piece of paper and a writing implement. So paper, it can be a journal, it can be scrap paper and a pen. We're going to do a little bit of writing today. And so I want to make sure that you have that in front of you. So just take a second and grab what you have, so that you can have that. All righty. Let's see. Before we begin with a land acknowledgement. We all reside on tribal lands of those who have lived on this land that has come to be called the United States, time immemorial. We pay respects to the elders of these lands, past and present. Just inviting you in to take a moment to consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that actually brings us all here together today. And we recognize the resilience together of those past and present who work in building a strong and sovereign nation where tribal members live their values and culture. Right? We have to land where we are and know where we're landing in order to move forward. We acknowledge that much of what we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development from the inception of and throughout its history, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their ascendants who suffered the horror of the transatlantic trafficking of their people, chattel slavery, and Jim Crow. We honor also the contribution of immigrants seeking safety and relief, many of whom provide labor critical to this country's thriving. And if you want to know a little bit more about what you can do to help rematriate the land where you are, you can text your zip code to that number and you can learn more about tribal land in your area. I am in Oakland, which is unceded Ohlone territory. So just kind of knowing where we are, right, gets us to land. Right now, I want to just ask you to, if you haven't already, just rename yourself in your lovely little Zoom picture and rename with your pronouns, your name, where you're based, so we can all see. We're in from all over the place. I saw Maryland, I saw New Mexico. And then who you work with and how long have you been in the work? You can drop those two pieces, with whom you work and how long, in the chat, because that might be a little bit too long for your name. But again, just name, pronouns, and location if you don't have that yet. Okay. Before we go into anything, just landing in some shared agreements and housekeeping, I'm going to just tell you that I have two things that I'm managing today, which is my site, and I also have a cold. So in terms of housekeeping and shared agreements, one of the biggest things is make yourself as comfortable as you can. Do you have everything that you need in this moment? I can tell you I have 3 different liquids going on. So I invite you to make sure you have everything that you need in front of you at this moment so that you can really take care of yourself. You all give out so much to so many people in so many ways, and you're called upon. And so sustenance is really important, and paying attention to what's happening with you is really important. The agenda is going to flex and flow with the group. There are some slides that you have that we're not going to cover, and Millie will connect you if you would like with me to talk a little bit through that. I'm open for that and available through email. I'll have my information at the end of the show, at the end of our workshop. But just know that we may skip around because I'm really interested and really want to make sure that all of you get to be with each other. So to that end, let's also work collectively to create and be in brave space. We're going to have some breakouts today. And so really coming forth as much as you can, knowing who you are. The difference, they say, between extroverts and introverts are about 7 seconds, right? So knowing kind of where you fall and what your comfort level is. So, and being brave with that, seeing what you can bring. Patience and compassion with ourselves and with technology. Again, I'm not a tech guru. I'm a social worker and a therapist. And definitely tech and data is not my thing. So I'm going to do as much as I can. And we have wonderful tech support on today. So if there's anything that you want to add that you feel is important for our time together today, please feel free to throw it in the chat. And I'll be checking chat periodically, but Millie will also be doing that and be able to support you there, and Amina as well. So. And then the other thing too is, there's so much tech that's happening, and there's so much stuff that's happening, and it's hard to get into these workshops sometimes when you have a million other things on your mind and your phone is in front of you. And so if you can you put your phone on Do Not Disturb? Can you put it away? Can you give yourself this time? So just thinking about that. All right, so we landed on the land, and now we're gonna land in ourselves. So I want to invite you all to move back, just push back from your computer, make yourself a little bit comfortable, position yourself so you can feel the ground if that feels right. I know sometimes I sit with my feet tucked, and that feels good to feel that. So wherever you are, just letting something touch the ground or touch your chair, and just noticing what that feels like. And just find your breath. Just notice where your breath is right now. Is it in your lungs? Is it in your belly? Just kind of scan your body and see what's going on. We're all in various states of health. We are all caring for people in various states of health. So where is our health coming from? Just tuning in to your breath, and see if you can just elongate your breath once you find it. Maybe just taking a couple deep inhales through your nose, And just exhaling through your mouth just a couple times, just to land and feel if you can let your body settle even 5 or 10% more than it is right now. Right? We're here and we're paying attention, but also your body pays attention even more than your mind does. And so relaxing your body to allow it to absorb what it needs will fuel also your brain. Right? And breath allows us to do that. I want to invite you then to look around your space. So look around to the sides, look up, make sure your head is turning and your eyes are turning. Look behind you. I know sometimes we just have white walls behind us and it's not anything great, but find the texture if that's what behind you. Look down to the ground. Make sure you're looking all around your space and make sure you locate your exit in the room that you're in. If you needed to leave, where would you leave? Yeah. Part of the reason we do that is because we want our nervous systems to know that there's safety available to us, right? Even in these moments that may feel more safe, it's always a really great thing we can do. Our eyes are connected to our nervous systems. And I'll say that I tend to, in my presentations, I also tend to offer skills as we go and try them on. And so any of these things you can do with yourself, you can do with the clients that you work with people that you supervise. Really just taking a moment and establishing safety, which is a big part of trauma-informed services, right? So just bringing yourself present to this moment, present to your safety, present to your stability, feel your chair or your seat, wherever you are, and just take a breath. And when you're ready, just drop into the chat something that's on your heart right now. We always talk about what's on our mind, and you'll probably hear me a little bit be repetitive about the mind is kind of the last part of healing. It's really the body and the subcortical place, which is the bottom levels of the brain where healing happens, right? And where we store our traumas. So just take a moment, drop into what's on your heart, and drop it into the chat. Thanks, Millie. Yeah, right. If you're around the vote for Roe v. Wade, if you're in the community, our kids, yep, our family members. Yeah. Really worrying about other people who are going through it. We're holding a lot. They're really holding a lot. The environment worries about the environment. We're worried about how our kids are being taken care of and what's happening for them. How we're holding all of our stresses, right? Yeah. Yeah, a lot of us are supporting family members who have a lot going on themselves as we're in these positions where we're supporting, peers, and maybe we are peers and we're supporting clients who are having their own challenges. So how are we balancing? How are we balancing that with how we want to grow or how we want to change? Yeah, Roe v. Wade is huge. Right? One of the things that we talk about when we talk about trauma, and we will, is choice, right? And Roe v. Wade is about this concern about not having choice. Yeah. Yeah. Can you be enough? How do we find where we know that we are enough? Because exactly who we are is enough. Yeah. And that's a good question too. Thinking about how are we dealing with chronic and complex trauma, right? A lot of times we talk about after the fact, but most of us are walking with it. So how are we walking with it? Yeah. And organizations that are maybe not trauma informed and maybe not playing it how they speak it. The difficulty with that, right? We're all in various states of healing or not healing, trauma or not trauma, and all the pieces in between. Yeah. And we're all products of the environments that we're in, right? It's all the circles, it's our own, but it's also all the places that we're moving in, all the systems that we're a part of, they all have impact. I think that's one of the things I'll just share that I do with individual clients when I'm doing therapy is, we talk really about the systems and how they have an impact on us, because it's not just who we are and are we enough, but also are we saying what's happening with the system, and is the system doing enough, right? And do we have energy to, to speak up for that and to shift that? How do we do that? Right, exactly. Yeah. So as it comes to you, just put it in chat. We're gonna run forward and get to what we want to get to. I'm gonna show you a silly clip. And I don't know how many of you have seen The Office, but it's a really great, fascinating way to look at trauma, non-trauma informed supervision.
Everyone, now would be a good time to freshen up because I'd like everyone to meet in the conference room in 5 minutes, and I suggest that you bring a snack because we may be in there for a while. Michael, yes. Can I talk to you in my office for a second? Sure, but could I first talk to you at my office?
Also be a boss.
I have noticed that welcome. Thank you. I've noticed we've been having a lot of conference room meetings, and I'm wondering if perhaps those are a bit disruptive. Yes. No, I don't think they are. I think the meetings are very important. Okay. Maybe we should talk specifics. Let's do. Okay. Yesterday we had a meeting about planets. Well, to be fair, Jimothy. To be fair, Jimothy, that sounds weird. Are you okay with being called Jim? I am. Jim, to be fair, the conversation wasn't about planets. Right. At first, we were talking about introducing a line of toilet paper. And what part of the human body does one use toilet paper upon? So you draw a line from there to the other planets. And I think by the end, we all learned a little bit about how small we are. Yes, I agree. Because it's a big universe, and we're all just little tiny specks of dust. I just think that maybe they're eating large amounts of the day. You know what eats a large amount of the day are naps. You go to sleep, it's light out, you wake up, it's dark. That's the whole day. Where did that day go? I have no idea. You mean on a weekend? Yes.
So he never fails to crack me up. Drop in the chat one of the things that he did that were so not trauma informed. Not hard. What'd you see? What was not trauma informed? That's right. Yep, dismissal, interruption, correction, right? Centering himself, very rough touch. He couldn't get the guy's name right. He can't get his supervisor's name right, right? Like, how are we not knowing who we're sitting in front of, who we're supervising? Yeah. What's something that you see about Michael? Michael's the boss. What's something that you see that's maybe not trauma informed, but is not so, funky, for lack of a better word? What do you see about him? Facial expressions, yeah. He definitely wants to make sure that he's being seen by the camera as, yeah, exactly, as somebody great. He does have a fragile ego, right? And so when we have fragile egos, we want to protect that, right? So what does that tell us about him? It tells us that he's kind of fragile, right? It tells us that he's going through something, that he really has hopes to be liked and to feel confident, right? And that manifests in so many different ways. We're talking about, two white men in conversation too. So there's a lot more to talk about in terms of cultural humility and equity in this. It's part of trauma-informed principles. We're not going to get into it, but also just to kind of keep in mind about those pieces too, right? And how that factors in. So yeah, the other piece about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed approach is humor. How are we finding humor about this, and how even in the midst of something that's really difficult or something that's ongoingly difficult, how do we also take a break, right? That allows our nervous systems to take a break. Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for that. Okay, so we're flying into trauma-informed principles overview. These are the trauma-informed principles. We're only going to focus on 3 of them, which, to tell you the truth, for today is probably too many anyway, but we're just going to chat through them a tiny little bit, and we're going to do some activities and exercises and breakouts that are going to allow us to land a little bit more in that. So just as we go through, the next couple of slides are going to be a little bit more about each of these principles, 3 of the highlighted principles there in bold. And as we go through, as you're understanding it, I want you just to think about what you're already doing in your supervision or in your work with your clients that matches up with the principles. So the first one is really understanding safety and stability, which is one of the biggest things that gets disrupted in trauma. And I'm going to back and forth go between trauma as a singular event, but most often who we're working with has experienced not just singular events, but they are continuing to experience trauma. And that can be the trauma of racism, that can be the trauma of sexism, that can be the trauma of classism, right? Access. So all those pieces factor in. So one of the things that really has a ripple effect is where our physical and social and emotional safety get disrupted, right? And we come into this place where we need to manage risks. Like even Michael and his fragile ego was, had to manage some risk there. Like I'm going to be seen as not okay or not stable. And so I'm trying to manage all these things. So when we work to increase stability or to help our supervisees or our clients increase stability, that can help minimize stress. And sometimes that's the smallest possible thing, right? It's just minimizing changes. You'll notice that I said we're going to talk about trauma-informed principles, and we're just going to talk about the ones in bold, right? So just giving notice and preparation. How many times are you telling your supervisees or the people that you're working with, how many times are you saying, hey, this is going to happen. Hey, we have this thing coming up. How many different ways can you communicate those things so that they hit and land with the people that you're working with, right? So creating that stability, creating heads up when there's change. And we all know that we can't always give all the heads up when there's change. And so some of what we end up doing is a little bit of fallout, and we sit with the fallout. Right? And we get to exist with ourselves and with the people that we work with in that fallout. Creating physically safe environments, right? Protecting, thinking about where are the exits, and if somebody needs protection from, going to and from where they are, where you're working, right? Bullying. All of these pieces, we want to have environments that are accessible to people, that they're safe, that they're clean, that they're comfortable, right? And that's something that's a together job. It's not just, oh, I'm supervisor, so I get to decide this, but really collaboratively working with folks that we're working with on that. And then social emotional, that goes into the boundaries that we'll get into a little bit later, really helping and also you as a supervisor maintaining healthy interpersonal boundaries and communication skills, right? And some of that is proactive. So that's a little bit about safety and stability. And like I said, we're going to run through these a little bit because I want to make sure that you all have a lot of good time to synthesize and just to talk to each other, because all this stuff, I know that you already know, right? Because you can already know what doesn't feel safe. You can already know what doesn't feel stable. And when we know that, we can figure out what's the opposite of that. Collaboration and empowerment is another big thing, and it's kind of foundational for our supervision relationships, right? We tend to feel helpless, right? When we're in chronic and complex trauma or even a larger event, that overwhelms our senses. It overwhelms the ability that we have in that moment to cope, right? That's the definition of trauma. So losing that power and control, losing that feeling of connection, when we can provide that connection, when we can provide that empowerment, then we can help our supervisees and ourselves, we can help find choices. And that could promote our wellness, right? When we're thinking, do I have enough to help all these other people? We can suss out, well, what do I have available, right? And how can I meet myself, and how can I meet the people that I'm supporting? So that's about agency, right? Understanding the value of personal agency. We need to make our own choices. We need opportunities for that. So how are you providing that as a supervisor, right? How are you helping supervisees integrate their own life experiences into their work in a way that isn't trying to kind of therapize either a client or therapize themselves, but how is it integrating? How are you hearing it? And then saying, how does that apply to what you're doing? And then what do you need also more to support you, right? So the other piece is preparation. How are we providing information so that our staff can be prepared for what's coming, so that they have time? I just had a client who's a teenager and they haven't ever made a call to the doctor. So we ended up doing a role play where we did a role play of, what do you think is going to happen when you call the doctor? What do you think you'll need to say? What information do you need to have to begin with, right? So really doing those smaller building blocks that then help empower the person to do what it is they're doing, right? And really difficult jobs in the case of peer advocacy. Yes, I'm seeing you, Patrick, and just gonna hold on to that. Millie, maybe we can also tack that. Thank you for that question. It's a really great and deep question, right? And the other thing that I'll say is, we're never gonna hold all of the pieces, right? We can't hold all the pieces because there's so much to juggle. What we can do is, how can we do the best that we can with what we have also, right? So thinking about that, and thinking about how we're driving ourselves, and thinking about what we need for that in order to sustain that. And then the other piece of that is, what opportunities do people have to make choices? What opportunities do you have within your organizations to make decisions that are meaningful to you in your work, and have a meaningful impact on your work and even in your personal lives, right? Because we know trauma is about constriction, right? So if we're already feeling constricted, where are we providing, and also where are we seeking those places for opening? Because in the opening, the answers come. And then the third one that we're going over today, the third trauma-informed principle, is resilience and recovery. Like I said in the beginning, we talk about trauma-informed services, and it's a particular focus, right? And so sometimes we get so bent on the trauma that we forget about the resilience. And we'll talk just a little bit about vicarious resilience also in a bit. But trauma can have this long-lasting impact on us, and we can feel helpless. So how we are helping provide a stable and clear path for our supervisees or our clients to thrive. What are those building blocks? There's more ability there to find resilience, to build on resilience, to make meaning of the experiences that folks are having, and then to thrive, right? That could look like reflecting resilience. You might have heard that it's about a 5-to-1 ratio in terms of feedback with supervisees or anybody that you're in a role where you're supporting them. 5 positives for every one, hey, this is an area that maybe you could shift, that I'm going to help you shift in, or what do you think about this, right? So 5-to-1, think about what you get also as a supervisor. Do you get that? And also, are you offering that? How are you offering? Because you know that we hear the negative generally so loud and clear. It takes about 5 positives to kind of counter that, and to really sometimes help people see what they have going. Some of this is also goals for personal wellness in the context of overall goals for employment. And that's an important thing to think about when you're supervising and you don't want to be a therapist, that you're directing these goals for wellness to work. How is taking a walk in the morning or whatever, doing a stretch in the morning, how's that going to help you do your work better in the day, right? So it's kind of how we put the focus that helps us think about how to put the trauma-informed lens onto our supervision. And then also, how are we creating opportunities for wellness in our organizations and in our meetings, right? So today we landed together and we breathed together, right? So are we building in these moments for wellness? I was working at a nonprofit in East Oakland, which has seen its fair share of not having enough resources and a lot of violence, and also a lot of beauty and a lot of resilience. And one of the things we started there was like a water drinking contest, so that there were prizes, and the whole staff and there were hundreds of people who worked there and hundreds of young people who came through. And so we just started this, little punch card. How many glasses of water have you had? Little education about it. Here's a prize. We give a monthly prize. So it's just kind of how are we putting in place these little things that also don't have to be grand. They don't have to be the biggest thing, but it's really made of, I like to say that, mountains are made of little grains of dirt, right? So what we're doing in building is we're looking at what are the smallest pieces. So just thinking about that. We'll go a little bit more into these now as we go. So if you're reading this, notice where your shoulders are. Release them from your ears. Unclench your jaw. And drop your tongue from the roof of your mouth. And just see what that feels like. Notice resistance in your body to that. Notice resistance, if there's any, in your mind to that. Notice without judgment. Just thinking about how are you connecting in this moment. Are you connecting in this moment as you have other things that are calling for you? Okay. So one of the biggest parts of trauma and the biggest impacts is a lack of choice and connection, right? We don't necessarily, we do have choices, but sometimes we don't have choices depending on what, who we are and how we have income in our family, what the world deems is okay for us or not okay for us based on race or ability or class or gender expression, right? We're all kind of handed things, and we don't have choices about so much of that, but we do have choices about how we want to move with that. Right? So being able to access choice and connection in each moment is one of the things that can mitigate trauma, because it often takes that away. But there are places in our days, even if it's, I can pick out what socks I want to wear. We all have space for choice. And again, as we have these small places, they can build, and these small choices we can build. So just like what we're doing today, right? Building connection in this affinity group, it gives you a chance to connect. You're going to have a chance to talk to your peers, people who are in like roles, and really share what's been working and how you connect, right? So that helps lessen the isolation and helps provide a wider range of choices. And that's something that's really integral to trauma-informed supervision, is how are we doing that? How are we helping opening things up for the people that we work with, whether that's clients or whether that's supervisees? And again, knowing that sometimes the thing that we're going to be able to open up is take a breath and take another breath, right? That allows the front part of our brain, the back part of our brain, which is the kind of alarm bells that goes like really, that kind of likes to run around like crazy and be like, and take over. The breath allows us to shift from there and to shift from the animal brain, the limbic system that is about, dealing with crisis, fight, flight, or freeze. It allows us, that breath allows us to access the slower, much softer voice of our prefrontal cortex that is in our clients and in us, depending on our life experiences, whether past or continued, that is in development. That breath allows us to kind of slow, remind, where are my exits? Okay, brain, I have these exits. Now I'm going to see what I need here. So I want to give you all a chance to do this in groups. We're going to, Joanne, I think, is going to put our discussion questions in the chat, so you'll all have access to that. And so what we're going to do is connect in groups. You're going to pick a timekeeper, introduce yourself, say hello, reintroduce with, pronouns, where you are, who you supervise, pick a timekeeper, and then you'll have 2 minutes each. And I just ask you to just listen as people are talking, and not necessarily to do a verbal back and forth. And if that's uncomfortable, just notice what's happening in your body and just notice the desire to respond to what somebody's saying. But really just thinking about, how are you practicing connection in your life? And how are you fostering connection with supervisees? And what are the choices you have on the daily? Where do you find choice? And really, I a little bit merged personal and professional, because it's quite the kind of white supremacist capitalist lie that we can completely separate everything because we're full spirit, right? And so we do bring the personal into the professional. It's here, we're here. When we're embodied in our work, we're everything, right? It doesn't mean that we can't kind of set some things aside, but it's in there, because you probably tell your clients too, if we're not kind of dealing with this, we know what's in there and it's going to manifest, right? So thinking about what the choices are that you have on the daily or that you turn towards, it can be personal, professional, and how do you offer choice to those you supervise? How do you help people you supervise find choice? Both within their personal lives and also within the role. So we're going to break out into triads. And we'll have a little bit of time, and I believe they should be like, maybe we can give everybody like a 1 minute wrap up reminder, and I will see you back in a little bit. Okay, everybody should be back in. All righty. Welcome back, everybody. I hope it was great to meet people who are doing similar things to you. Just want to invite you to drop in the chat What came up for you when you were having, even when you were just considering the questions or some things that came up in the group, and just thinking about maybe, not necessarily identifying your group folks, but just kind of talking about what you noticed or what came to you. Mm-hmm. Connection, right? You could.
Are you talking to me?
I think I'm talking to everybody, but I don't know who me is.
Okay, don't worry about. As long as we're talking to everybody, I'm not worried about answering.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, a sense of relatability, right? I can see what's going on. I can connect. I know that I'm not alone. Okay, Patrick, thank you for coming. Hope the PowerPoint will be helpful for folks who have to leave early. And for other folks, if there's anything, right, we don't always think about how we bring choice into our supervision sessions, right? Where do we provide that? What could that look like? An example is, am I giving choice for, when I can meet, or do my supervisee and I collaborate on when the best time to meet in our meetings, or where the best places to meet in our meetings, right? So there's some small places that we can think about it. I'm seeing also that there's great power in this group, powerful advocates, and just power amongst ourselves and what we're doing, and just being in that and feeling that can also be a really great mitigator of trauma, right? Vicarious resilience is a real thing. We can take that and we can be in others' resilience, and we can try it on for ourselves. We can see other ways. Yeah, for sure. I've stopped using the word balance because I feel, it's always like, because I think that we oftentimes when we talk about like, healthy life balance, that we think that there's somewhere to get, like there's an end goal. And I tend to think of balance as more like scales that are constantly reconfiguring, right? And retitrating, because it's kind of a juggling act, all of it, right? And it is important to figure out, where do I have balance and where do I not? And what do I need to do? And even sometimes I don't have balance, and that's all I can do right now. I have a friend just sent me, who's a social worker and therapist and works with young people, just sent an article about, you don't have to fold the laundry. And it was really about this woman who talked about not having the wherewithal to fold the laundry. So she figured out, I'm going to just throw it all clean into a basket and I'll be able to find it, right? So how are we finding these little ways, not that somebody else says that we should do or how it should be, but these little ways that we can make little just little ways that we can shift things for ourselves and do things to be able to juggle everything better for ourselves. It might not look like everybody else, and it might not look like, trauma informed everything, but you also know inherently. Yeah. A plate balance on a pencil. Right. Exactly. Kind of like one of those acrobats who's like following it. Exactly. Right. And sometimes that's all we can do. We can only be in the running part of it. We can only be in the following of the plate. But we do end up getting, if we can create that space, we can get to a place where you can say, oh, I'm doing this thing. Do I want to put the plate down for a minute? Or do I want to shift the pencil for something wider to balance that plate on? So yeah, totally. I can find that article and send it to you. It's a great article. So that's the other piece, right? Is how are we connecting with ourselves? Because if we're not, how do we connect with other people? And how are we helping our supervisees connect into themselves and what their own life experience is, if we can't do that for ourselves, right? So it's a little bit of role modeling. Thank you, Marlene, for coming. So really thinking about how are you connecting with yourself, with your own experiences and what you're bringing. Right. And that's kind of the core also of empathy and what allows us, to continue on like water. Right. It's connecting in myself so I can keep talking. The other piece of this, and when we connect in, right, platforms, thank you, that invite collaboration, being mindful of ourselves, right, like really paying attention to ourselves and also to what's going on with our supervisees or our clients. Because you can tell when something has shifted for somebody, even if you can't name it necessarily, you can tell if you've been working with people and you've gotten to know them, right? So one of the ways to mitigate and connect and build and create way for ourselves is by working on resilience and recovery. And that is really figuring out, where we have control, how do we make meaning of things? How are we finding our purpose? Can we be curious about things? Where's our openness? Yes, oxygen mask first, right? That's part of resilience. If we don't have our own oxygen mask on, then it's real hard to help somebody else because we're not breathing. So are we breathing? And the other thing is we get caught a lot because often in this field I have found and experienced that we tend to get trained to say, oh, I have to take care of it all by myself. I have to figure this out for myself. It's only me. And the fact is that it's not, it's mutual aid and it's community, right? And that's why we're here in this moment. So how are we asking for what we need? And how are we knowing that part of this is also connecting with other people and with resources so that we can get that? And how are we imparting that to the people that we're working with, right? And also, how are we looking at our organizations? How are our organizations saying it's not just self-care, right? We get these like self-care days, and then the organization sometimes is off the hook, right? And that's because the organization is just kind of a fractal, it's just kind of a unit, a conglomeration of how the individuals are a part of it, right? So how are we also looking to our organization and figuring out and helping our supervisees and our clients find what they need so that we can also say, hey, organization, like how are we zooming out and what do we need to do overall? What policies do we need to look at to shift so that there's more room for wellness? Right, that could look like diversity in caseloads. That could look like breaks, those kinds of things. So I want you to just grab your pen and paper, put that in front of you. And just as we're talking about vicarious resilience, we forget sometimes, we're so used to focusing on the trauma that we forget sometimes to look at, where the resilience is. So pick one of these facets of resilience building that's on the tree of resilience, and write about it. How do you understand that? How do you understand open-heartedness? What does that mean to you? How do you foster that in yourself? And how do you foster it with staff? And just quick. And you can even just take a moment to write what the phrase means to you or what the word means to you. What connectedness, what does that ping for you as you're thinking about who you are, what you bring to this work, and who you're working with and what they bring? Yeah. Yeah, open-heartedness is definitely being compassionate and thoughtful of people around you, right? It's allowing space for. Right? And that begins internally too. What are you allowing space for yourself? How are you being compassionate with yourself right in this moment? Can you be thoughtful of you too? And sometimes that looks like somebody said, boundaries. Sometimes that looks like boundaries. Yeah, finding purpose. Right? What helps me continue in this work? Why am I doing this? What's in it for me? I used to work with volunteers, and I had this one volunteer who used to go recruit other volunteers, and he would always say, it's selfish. I get so much out of volunteering. It's a selfish thing. It feeds me as much as I feel like it feeds community, right? So how are we making that happen? So, and thinking about our resilience, right? Because vicarious trauma is real. Excuse me. So I want you just to think about the things that you already know about vicarious trauma and what it is and how you see it manifest. Right? You can feel it. You can really feel it. So what does it look like? Right? Just thinking about what it looks like, how it shows up, and how maybe resilience can help with these things. The biggest thing about vicarious trauma, and there's like, I've done day-longs on vicarious trauma and secondary traumatic stress. So the very, very short thing is that vicarious trauma is a change in your world belief or your world views. I've worked in communities that have experienced so much violence that when I hear somebody crying or yelling, that ultimately generally ends up being somebody like just having a good time or just screaming at somebody, I always think like, oh, is this person getting abused or are they getting hurt, right? So being aware of that. And what are the things that we're doing to mitigate those things? And how are we noticing them in our supervisees, bringing them to the surface, and then helping them find ways to mitigate those things, right? Like how are we shoring up in order to deal with the things, that might come up with supervisees, right? And you'll notice if you're taking work home, if your supervisees are taking work home, like you'll know this. I remember I used to do that all the time. I used to think about the young people I was supervising. Taking that into account. All right, we're going to run through some of this because I want to make sure that we have enough time for our next breakout that's coming up. And Joanne, we may end up just having 15 minutes for that instead of 20, but we're going to run through some of this stuff. The reality is you are in a unique role because you need to advocate for your clients and your supervisees, and you also have to manage and enforce organizational standards, right? So it's not just one or the other being in support, but you also have to kind of carry through the mission and the vision of the organization. So the ways that we do this is by assessing and creating a prevention plan. What is the client's current self-care methods in every realm, spiritual, physical, cognitive? What are their current strengths and supporters? An assessment of the organizational support, because that gives you a picture of how to advocate for what you need. What are the staff's professional and personal goals? Again, the personal dovetails into the professional. What's an action plan for these goals, right? Safety and stability says we create a plan. Resilience and recovery says we create a plan. And then what are their support needs? And that's support from you as a supervisor or as a peer advocate. It's support from the organization. It's support from friends and family. So these are one of the things that we can do to kind of help mitigate vicarious trauma and prevent it, right? The more we shore ourselves and the people we work with up, the less the impact will be. Doesn't mean there's not going to be an impact. So how to be not a therapist. The main difference, there's a lot of similarities and overlap between supervision and therapy. But the biggest thing is that therapy assists clients in exploring and working through experiences that have been, impactful to their overall functioning and look at like more of their overall life. And relationships. And supervision is really assisting supervisees to build the skills and to understand and acknowledge and work with their experience as it relates to the work. Thank you, Brandy, for coming. So that's one of the biggest things, right? And offering resources, which is also can be a part of therapy. So, but both of them, we're offering a reflective listening space. We're offering close listening. We're offering safety. We're offering assistance in illuminating and developing and reaching goals. And there's some sense also of, confidentiality and keeping as much as we can what's in that room, right? So those are kind of some of the things, and it gets really tricky. I'm just going to name that. It gets really tricky, and you all will talk about this when we break out. But it does get tricky because we get called, and our hearts are called, and nobody's in this work because of the paycheck, right? You're in this because of your life experience, and you're in this because of your heart, right? And so it gets tricky when we have our heart involved. And so it's really this balance that you're talking about. And it's really this kind of understanding of how do I help this person move forward in a way that's going to help them do the work and continue. And that part of that is personal, right? It all feeds in. We're going to skip this. This is just about co-regulation and how we see somebody else, and that actually goes right into like a very central, the vagus nerve, very central part of our brain that can help us feel okay, can help us feel calm, can help us feel supported and access, again, that breath, the connection, the choices, right? So just thinking about that. And I'll just call you for just 30 seconds to think about somebody that, think about a time that you were distressed and you went to go talk to somebody who was really listening. Remember, like, what was their body language? How were they looking at you? What were they saying or not saying? What do you remember about how you felt as you were talking to them? And how did you feel after the conversation? Because we're hardwired for connection from the very beginning of our lives. We're hardwired for connection. The trauma pieces come in when those connections are disrupted. So some of what you can do in supervision is you can help foster and create that kind of connection. So we're going to skip over this. There was a scenario, but I'd rather have you all, because there's so much power in all of you chatting, I'd rather have you all be able to come together and talk a little bit more, and we'll be able to have some time for questions. Just maybe 2 minutes per person per question, and it's an either or. Joanne, if you can drop the questions in the chat, that would be awesome. So how are you already embodying trauma-informed supervision, right? Specifically, how are you already providing for safety and stability and for collaboration and empowerment and resilience and recovery? How are you already addressing that? And if you think, oh, I'm not, think harder, because you are. Make sure that you have a timekeeper, and then so you can answer that, and or if there's time, you can talk about something that you're wrestling with. But I do want to ask that you let people know before you talk about it whether or not you want feedback, right? That's part of it. That's a choice. So let folks know if you want some feedback before you share, or if you prefer for people just to be in witness. And we'll have about, it says 5 minutes per person, but I think we have less time. So maybe we'll start with 3 minutes per person, and we'll see how that goes. And we'll give you a 1 minute warning for the end time.
Before we go to our breakout rooms, if you get into a breakout room where people are not present, need to be moved to another room, please just come back to the main room and we'll get you reassigned to another.
Yeah, awesome. And if there's extra time, please feel free to share out on other things. All right. Welcome back, folks. I'm curious just to hear if you want to drop in the chat what happened for you in that group, how that was. Excuse me. Yeah, I know the timing is definitely, I'm working on the timing. There's never enough time for these things. So, and that's helpful feedback too, Mary. Thank you. Anything that came up for anybody? We're just gonna shift over to just a little bit of Q&A. Yeah, connections and similarities, right? There are these deep connections and similarities, even though we may be in different environments, we're still maybe working and coming across similar things. Yeah, Charlotte. Yeah. Right. So figuring out what's the kind of support that we need to offer in a crisis moment versus what's the long term, because they look different, right? So making sure that we're kind of titrating for that, because support looks different, right? Generally, when somebody's in crisis, we're offering less options, asking less questions, or being a little bit more directive. And as things expand and open, there's more space to ask questions and to see what's going on for somebody and what they need and to figure out, right? And so I'm really glad to see that you all are connecting. And I want to just now open it up for questions or comments. Something, we're going to wrap up, but feel free also, because we're kind of in the wrap up time, and I want to definitely respect everybody's time because I know you're so busy. You can also kind of put in the chat, something you're inspired as a result of this session, or a learning or a question you have. Yeah, and if somebody wants to raise their hand, we probably can hear from 2 people. So if you want to do that, just want to leave some space, or if you're just marinating in the connection that you just made, if there was something illuminating. I'm glad that folks enjoyed the breakouts. I know that that's so critical. Again, that's the connection, right? That we end up feeling so isolated and like we're supposed to do everything on our own. And even if it's not exactly the same role or exactly the same organization, there's things that we can understand in common. Yeah. There's a lot of power out there, and there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of wisdom that's available. I don't know if everybody's on a listserv together, or if there's ever any, contact information shared out, but maybe that's something, Millie, I don't know if that's something that you could do, but maybe offer to connect folks if you're not already connected and you want to be connected. Maybe let Millie know. Yeah. And vicarious trauma is legit. It's, it's like emotions are catching, right? So you can be sitting in a room with somebody who's kind of miserable, and you can notice that you might start to feel a little bit upset yourself. And so it's catching, right? Emotions are catching. And so trauma is like that also, really, when we're taking everything in. And if we don't have the space, if we haven't created the practices for ourselves to, kind of move it and make sense of it, right? And connect about it, then it gets hard to keep going with it. And it can lead to different shifts in our lives and how we see things. So yeah, vicarious trauma is no joke. And it's worth it to pay attention to how it's showing up for you in your supervision, and just for you, for yourself, right? Yeah. So Millie, if you want to let folks know in the chat, what's a good way if people want to be included in an email list and want to connect with each other? Because it sounds like, can you let us all know what's the best way for people to connect? Is it best just to put email in the chat, or?
We do have, we have a registration list from everyone that's registered for this, but that's, I think, how many, Joanne, did you say that was?
It's something.
Yeah, 300 something. So
yeah.
We have to get everyone's permission.
Okay.
To put out that, but I definitely encourage everyone to share their emails with each other. Okay. And maybe what we'll do is ask people who have registered, and I don't know, we have to work out the logistics, but ask people who have registered this, would they be interested in having a listserv, and sharing their contact information with each other.
Great. Okay. So in the meantime, also, if you want to connect with folks, then also drop your email in here, and the chat will be saved in the meeting. So maybe that's also something we can go through. So yeah, it's great that everybody.
That is something that we probably could do. If you drop it in the chat, we can pull them out, and anybody who wants to be on that group can go ahead and have their email in this, and then we can do one email linking everybody. That might be
Fabulous.
a better thing to do.
Yeah, great.
Oh, maybe a LinkedIn group. That is a fabulous idea.
That is a
Right.
great idea.
That's okay. I'm making note of that.
All right.
Yeah.
The power of the group, right? The power of the community, what you can bring to each other when you have some time and you create some space to connect, how that brings everything together and creates some resilience and creates a path and creates some safety and stability, right? It's this collaboration that's happening right in this moment. So just kind of noticing the embodiment of it as we go. And as you go. And again, if you want to also drop along with your email, if you want to drop in a key learning for you from today, or something that you're inspired to do as a result of the session, I'm definitely hearing that people are interested in being connected with each other for future conversation, for future community, right? Maybe there's even a, sharing out of best practices together, but feel free to also drop in something that you're inspired by, something that you learn being present with others.
Tracy, add that LinkedIn idea to our next team meeting.
I've done so. Thank you.
Awesome.
Power of group.
Mhm.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for letting me talk with you. I see you, Kristen. You want to learn more about how to foster vicarious resilience? For sure, right? We do so much training on trauma. How do we do the trainings on resilience, right? How are we thinking about that?
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, that's a really great carry forward, right? Thank you all. I'm putting up my information real quick, and then Millie wants to tell you about the next the next meeting that's coming up. So this is me. If you want to email me, feel free. I'm happy to be in touch with you. And thank you so much for all of the wisdom. I mean, you all are superheroes. I know that. I don't have to see everybody and I don't have to know everybody. I know what you do and I know where your heart is. And I encourage you to be with all of that and also your heart for yourself, right? Don't forget that piece. It's really critical. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it over to Millie to talk about the next meeting.
Absolutely. Yes, there will be a link, Carlos, for the CEUs. Joanne, does that get dropped in the chat or will that go out with the survey as soon as people close out?
It's separate from the survey.
Okay. So maybe if we, excuse me, put that in the chat. Just real quickly, we are at the final session for our series for this year. We're going to do this again next year, I think. It's been super popular. So I'm already, thinking vicarious resilience might be the very first one for the next year. But our final session is going to be on June 1, and we are just going to have it as kind of an open session where if you have any kind of questions that have come up, if you need insight on any current challenges. So we're just going to have discussion there and give a chance for people to connect with each other. We can talk about, because by then we will have talked internally around maybe a LinkedIn group or, a listserv. Maybe we can even talk about what topics need to happen in the next year. So I hope you'll join us on June 1st for that. And until then, I hope all goes well in your world and you enjoy the rest of your week.